Okay, so yeah, once again, so this paper is about how pricing and quality decisions affect regulation in AI-enabled product markets in the AI supply chain. So this is a little different from the regulation that we hear about how to regulate the development of foundation models and how to develop guardrails for them. So this is different from that because we are talking about regulation of downstream AI product markets. This work is co-authored with Sehan Chian and Dangpan Liu. Both of them are at Tsinghua University. Sehan is actually a third-year PhD student, and Dangpan is my colleague and professor over there. So to begin, of course, there's a lot of money that gets poured into the development of foundation models, right? But these foundation models are not still appropriate for downstream markets which require specific domain knowledge, right? Finance or legal or biomedical, right? So such foundation models must then be fine-tuned using domain-specific data, right? So these firms that are interested in developing these AI-enabled products then should have their own domain-specific data. For example, AI assistants for legal work, we have a startup named Harvey, and they have a partnership with LexisNexis, and they use other kinds of public data to actually fine-tune OpenAI's models, right? Competing with Harvey in the same AI product space is you have CoCounsel, which is a legal assistant put out there by Thomson Reuters, right? And this company has got its own private data from its previous products like Westlaw and Practical Law. Again, the fine-tuning is done on OpenAI's models. So essentially what we have is a situation like this. We have a common foundation model, and this foundation model is fine-tuned by competing firms that create their own AI-enabled models, and of course these models, these AI products will then compete in the downstream market. So this is the AI supply chain that we are talking about, and we are talking also about this market and how regulation should happen in this end user AI-enabled product market. So how is this AI supply chain actually different from existing supply chains that we know about? And when I say existing supply chain, think of a manufacturer and a retailer, right? That's a supply chain. But that's very different from this AI supply chain. Why is that so? One of the defining features of this kind of a supply chain is product co-creation, okay? So what is this product co-creation? Well, there are two steps to this. First thing is that these downstream firms need to get their domain data, which then they need to curate and make it ready so that fine-tuning can be done with that data, right? And this whole process is expensive because this perhaps may require hiring domain experts to put the data in shape, right? So for example, Thomson Reuters hired several lawyers who curated about 30,000 research questions and their answers so that this can be used for fine-tuning, okay? So this is expensive, and firms incur cost in this co-creation process, okay? But that is not all. Once the domain data is created and is ready for use, this will then be used to fine-tune the foundation models, and this fine-tuning occurs on the computing infrastructure of the foundation model providers. It does not happen on the domain, on the firms themselves. And the reason, of course, for that is that the foundation model providers don't want to give away their model weights and all this other information to the downstream firms, right? So there is then a cost, a GPU and infrastructure cost involved to actually do the fine-tuning, right? And so the foundation model providers incur this GPU, this fine-tuning cost. So this is another kind of a cost now. There's this cost over here for getting the domain data ready, and there is this cost over here, which is to actually fine-tune on the infrastructure of the provider. Now, of course, the provider charges a fine-tuning price to the firms to do that. Okay, so this is a we are talking about different ways of pricing, as Hemant was talking about. Well, this is token-based pricing. This is kind of the industry standard, so we are going with that. So the more amount of volume of domain data that is taken by that is used by the downstream firms, the more the price that needs to be paid, right? Because more tokens, more money that you need to pay. And of course, that's a revenue source for the provider, but it is a cost for the firm, right? So there is that, and these two steps then help in this product co-creation. And finally, we use something like a service, software as a service kind of a model, where this now product that's available on the infrastructure of the provider can then be used to do inference, right? So when queries are raised by downstream consumers, these queries will go and responses will be generated. All of that happens on the infrastructure of the provider, not with the firm, right? So once again, there is an inference price that needs to be paid by the downstream firms to the foundation model provider, right? So this is kind of the setup that I wanted to talk about. And as I go forward, I'm going to focus more on these costs, these two kinds of costs, and the prices. Now, of course, there is a price that is, there are three prices over here, right? Two prices are the prices are set by the foundation model provider. These are the fine-tuning price and an inference price, which the provider charges. And also then there is a downstream price charged by the firms to the consumers, right? So there's these three different prices that are being charged. Okay, so now our big question really is that how, in this kind of a setting, there's a lot of talk about how AI-enabled firms will actually take away more consumer surplus from consumers. So how should consumer surplus be protected in this kind of a setup? That's kind of what we're talking about. Now, in general, the approach of governments and policy-making bodies has been to encourage pro-competitive policies. And these policies are supposed to help in generating and protecting consumer surplus. So take some examples. Pro-price or a price and pro-price competitive policies. You can do that by increasing price transparency. Ticketmaster is an example, right? If you think about pricing, how the customers saw the prices of the ticket during their purchase funnel, the prices changed in their experience, right? In the beginning of the purchase funnel, they might see a price such as $15 for a ticket. But at the last stage of the purchase funnel, when they're about to buy, this price may go up to something like $23. Why? Because some kind of service fee and processing fee was not included upfront, right? And then FTC changes rules saying that Ticketmaster cannot do that, right? So the prices should be transparent and should be the same across the entire purchase funnel of the consumer, right? And other ways of encouraging price competition, make sure that competitors should display their prices in a way so that they can be easily compared with each other, right? So you facilitate price comparison. So for example, internet service providers need to show their basic monthly price. And this base monthly price can then be compared easily by consumers across different providers. So these are examples of pro-price competitive policies. There can also be pro-quality competitive policies. For example, fake reviews are not allowed, right? Negative reviews cannot be taken off, right? If they're negative reviews, you cannot remove them. And you cannot buy positive reviews, right? So all of them, are part of rules of the game. And there are examples. Fashion Nova is the one that you see on the slide. That firms, when they removed some negative reviews, they were found out and they actually had to pay a settlement. Okay, now in the AI supply chain, it seems that the governments are following the same kind of an approach of trying to, encourage pro-competitive policies. And in interest of time, I'm just going to, move on. And there are some very interesting ideas coming from China, in terms of regulation. So these are some examples. Cities like Shenzhen have allocated some budget to give subsidies to firms to fine-tune foundation models. So, and of course, the idea is simple. If you subsidize the creation of foundation models, firms will perhaps create a higher quality end product, which will therefore enhance consumer surplus, right? So those are the ideas, and this is kind of pervasive. Different cities are doing the same thing. Okay, so which of these policies work? That's kind of my main question over here. Does encouraging price competition work? Does encouraging quality competition work? And does providing compute subsidies work? So this is kind of my main question. And that is a snapshot of the model that we use over there. And again, as Hemant says, in 20 minutes, it's like really hard to talk about these models. But a couple of things that I want to point out, and this is connected with the co-creation slide that I was showing you earlier. There is a cost for fine-tuning because the data needs to be curated. And the more volume of data that you curate, the bigger that cost that the firms will incur. So I'm using that as V is the volume of data, and you have a convex cost over there. So that's one kind of cost. The other one is the GPU cost, which is again a convex cost, because the moment you start involving more and more GPUs, the cost will go up exponentially. So those are the two costs. And the CV is the coefficient of the data curation costs, and this is the CF is the coefficient for the fine-tuning costs. So just keep that in mind, and we will go forward, we talk more about it. So what are our results now? I'll come to my results. So the first thing is, in general, when you think about any policy that will encourage price competition, what will happen? Prices will go down. That should always enhance consumer surplus. Okay, and that is true in a standard supply chain with like a manufacturer and retailer. That doesn't happen in the AI supply chain. Okay, and what we find is that only when the costs are relatively high, only then this works. Consumer surplus increases only in this situation. Okay, and why is this so? This is again because of co-creation. When you increase price competition, prices go down, but what does that do to the quality co-creation incentives of the downstream firms? Their incentive to create quality will also go down. And in fact, it is possible that quality creation incentives go down so much so that they actually create a worse effect on consumer surplus than the price reduction effect, kind of works counter to that. So the quality effect actually overwhelms the price effect. Fortunately, something else also happens. The foundation model providers incentives also kick in, because as the prices are going down, they actually also are losing out. And therefore, what they want to do is they want to reduce their fine-tuning and inference prices that they charge the firms, so that the firms eventually create more quality because of that. So this creates a counterbalance to some extent. And overall, we see that the consumer surplus increases when the costs are high enough. Immediately, you can think that as the GPU costs are going to go down, we may actually come to a situation where encouraging price competition may not work. Okay, because this condition may not be fulfilled anymore. Costs are not high enough. Quality competition, on the other hand, I have only 5 minutes left. So quality competition, on the other hand, always works. Okay, and the last thing is about compute subsidies. And of course, one thing to keep in mind about subsidies is that, as you reduce the costs of the firms to create quality, by giving them subsidies, they will create a higher quality. Sure, consumer surplus goes up, but the governments incur the cost of subsidies. So what you want is a net effectiveness. The increase in customer surplus should actually be more than the subsidy costs incurred by the governments. And that actually happens in a very interesting situation when the costs are really low enough. right? So when I put these two things together, this is kind of the putting everything together. Look at just one of these pictures would be enough. So encouraging quality competition always works across the entire range of costs. But if you look at compute subsidies, they work when the costs are, this is cost on this axis. So when the costs are relatively low, compute subsidies work. And encouraging price competition works when costs are relatively high. So in that sense, what we are seeing is that encouraging price competition, the regulatory agencies should take that with caution. And in particular, as costs go down, perhaps focusing either on encouraging quality competition or even giving subsidies may be a better answer. Okay, so I think I'll probably stop at that and take a few questions. Yes.
We have a mic for the questions. Real quick. I'll walk this over.
So I think this morning, actually, we were talking about endogenous growth theory in macroeconomics. And there's this whole idea of non-rivalry in ideas. And that really applies in these kind of foundation model training. Because I think the subsidies, what they will do is they might create that kind of boom sort of multiplier, if you will. And that may be something you can look at in your output function, how you model those sort of knowledge spillovers because of the idea of non-rivalry of ideas.
Okay.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
to you.
But definitely I'll talk to you more about how. Yeah, sure, thanks. Question here.
Would you mind go to slide 13 so that we can see the cost functions more again? And a question is my intuition is that how competitive the landscape on each position of the value chain seems to be important for the result, but I don't think you mentioned that. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. No, you are absolutely correct. Actually, we use an aggregate demand model. And in this aggregate demand model, we have these parameters that capture the extent of quality competition and the price competition. And really what we are looking at is this theta Q and theta P, which represents those intensity of quality and price competitions. As this changes, what are the effects that we are actually seeing? But I'm happy to take it offline and discuss this more. All right, so thank you so much.